The autumn wind swept through the streets of Millbrook, Tennessee, carrying with it the scent of decaying leaves and the distant promise of an early winter. It was the kind of small town where everybody knew everybody's business, where secrets had a way of seeping through the cracks of old Victorian houses like water through a damaged roof. Population 3,247 souls, give or take a few who had wandered off to Nashville or Memphis, seeking something bigger than what these quiet streets could offer. Marcus Webb stood behind the counter of his hardware store on Main Street, arranging a display of winter supplies that nobody seemed particularly interested in buying. At 42 years old, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had seen things most people only read about in newspapers or watched in documentaries. His broad shoulders still held the posture of military discipline, though it had been 7 years since he'd hung up his uniform. 7 years since he'd left behind the life of a Navy SEAL, the midnight operations, the brotherhood forged in blood and sweat, the weight of decisions that meant life or death for people he'd never meet. These days, his biggest decisions involved whether to stock more snow shovels or ice melt. It was a different kind of life, one that most people in Millbrook assumed he'd chosen because he wanted peace and quiet. They weren't entirely wrong, but they weren't entirely right either. The bell above the door chimed, and Marcus looked up, expecting to see old Mrs. Patterson coming in for her weekly purchase of bird seed. Instead, he found himself staring at a boy who couldn't have been more than 12 years old, skinny as a rail, with clothes that hung off his frame like they'd been bought for someone twice his size. The kid's face was a road map of trouble, with a fresh bruise blooming purple and yellow across his left cheekbone and eyes that held the kind of wariness Marcus recognized from his years in combat zones. "Can I help you with something?" Marcus asked, his voice carrying the measured calm he'd perfected over decades of high-stress situations. The boy stood frozen just inside the doorway, his chest heaving like he'd been running. His sneakers were worn through at the toes, and his jacket, a thin windbreaker that offered no protection against the October chill, was zipped up to his chin, despite the warmth of the store. "You're the Navy SEAL," the boy said. It wasn't a question. Marcus set down the box of weather stripping he'd been holding. "Former Navy SEAL. Been out of the service for a while now. What's your name, son?" "Doesn't matter." The boy's voice cracked, betraying his attempt at bravado. "I need you to do something for me." "All right, what do you need?" The boy took a deep breath, and Marcus watched as something shifted in his expression. The wariness gave way to something else, something that looked almost like resignation, like a soldier who'd accepted that the mission was going to go sideways no matter what he did. "Please," the boy said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Arrest me." The words hung in the air between them like smoke from a dying fire. Marcus felt his pulse quicken, not from fear, but from the sudden recognition that this moment was important, that whatever had brought this child to his door wasn't going to be resolved with a simple conversation and a pat on the head. "I'm not a police officer," Marcus said carefully. "I can't arrest anyone." "Why would you want to be arrested?" "Because it's the only way." The boy's hands were shaking now, and Marcus noticed for the first time that he was clutching something inside his jacket pocket. "I did something bad, real bad, and I need someone to make sure I pay for it before something worse happens." Marcus moved slowly around the counter, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. He'd learned long ago that scared people, especially scared children, were unpredictable. One wrong move could send this kid bolting out the door and into whatever danger he was running from. "Why don't you tell me what happened?" Marcus suggested. "Maybe it's not as bad as you think. You don't understand." The boy's voice rose, cracking with desperation. "Nobody understands. I'm not asking for help. I'm asking you to stop me. You're supposed to be some kind of hero, right? That's what everyone in this stupid town says. Marcus Webb, the war hero who came home and opened a hardware store like nothing ever happened. Well, I need you to be a hero right now. I need you to put me somewhere I can't hurt anyone else." The door chimed again, and both of them turned to see a woman enter the store. She was in her late 30s, with tired eyes and the kind of beauty that had been worn down by years of hard living. She wore a waitress uniform from the diner down the street, and her name tag read Linda. "Ethan!" she gasped, her face cycling through relief, anger, and fear in rapid succession. "I've been looking everywhere for you. What are you doing here?" The boy, Ethan, backed away from her like she was something dangerous. "Don't touch me. I'm not going back there." "Sweetheart, please. We can talk about this at home." "That's not my home!" Ethan's voice echoed off the walls of the hardware store. "It's his home. It's always been his home. I'm just the thing that comes with you, right? The baggage. That's what he calls me. Your baggage." Linda's face crumpled, and Marcus saw years of pain compressed into that single expression. This wasn't a simple family disagreement. This was something deeper, something that had been festering for a long time. "Mom," Marcus said quietly, "I think maybe we should all sit down and talk about this. I've got a back office. It's private." "With all due respect, sir, this is a family matter." Linda's voice had taken on a hard edge. "Ethan, come with me right now." "No." The single word hung in the air like a challenge. Ethan's hand was still in his pocket, and Marcus noticed the way the fabric bulged around his fist. Whatever he was holding, it was substantial. "Ethan," Marcus said, keeping his voice steady, "what's in your pocket?" The boy's eyes met his, and for a moment, Marcus saw straight through to the terrified child beneath all that bravado. Whatever Ethan had done, whatever he was planning to do, it was eating him alive. "I took it from his nightstand," Ethan whispered. "He keeps it there in case someone breaks in. That's what he says anyway, but I know the truth. I know what he really uses it for." Linda's face went white. "Ethan, please give it to me, so you can give it back to him. So he can finish what he started?" Marcus felt the pieces clicking into place in his mind. The bruise on Ethan's face, the terror in his eyes, the way Linda flinched every time the boy raised his voice. He'd seen this pattern before, in villages overseas, in refugee camps, in the dark corners of the world where civilization's veneer wore thin. "Everyone take a breath," Marcus said. "Ethan, I need you to look at me, just at me, okay? I want you to slowly take your hand out of your pocket and put whatever you're holding on the counter. Can you do that for me?" "You'll arrest me then." "I told you, I can't arrest anyone. But I promise you this, if you give me what's in your pocket, nobody in this room is going to get hurt. And nobody is going to make you go anywhere you don't want to go. Not today." Ethan's lower lip trembled. For all his tough talk, he was still just a kid. A kid who'd been pushed to a breaking point that no child should ever have to face. "He's going to kill her," Ethan said, his voice cracking. "Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but someday he's going to do it. I've seen the way he looks at her when he's been drinking. I've heard the things he says when he thinks I'm asleep. And I decided if someone had to be the bad guy, it might as well be me. Better me than him. At least I'd have a reason." Linda let out a sob that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her. "Ethan, I never wanted you to know. I never wanted you to see. But I did see, Mom. I see everything. I saw what he did to you last Tuesday when you burned the toast. I saw the marks on your arms you tried to hide with that long-sleeved shirt. I saw you crying in the bathroom at 3 a.m. when you thought everyone was asleep." Marcus moved closer, his hand extended. "Give me the gun, Ethan. Whatever you're planning, this isn't the way. Trust me. I've seen what guns do to people. I've seen what they do to the ones who pull the trigger too. It doesn't make things better. It just creates a different kind of pain." "What would you know about it?" Ethan demanded. "You're a war hero. You probably shot lots of people. How is this any different?" "It's different because you have a choice. Right now, in this moment, you get to decide what kind of person you're going to be. The people I had to shoot were actively trying to kill innocent civilians. They'd made their choices long before I ever pulled a trigger. But you're 12 years old. Your whole life is still ahead of you. And I promise you, If you pull that gun out with the intention of hurting someone, it will follow you forever. It will be the first thing you think about when you wake up, and the last thing you think about before you fall asleep. It will change the way you see yourself, the way you see the world. Is that really what you want?" Ethan's hand trembled inside his pocket. Tears were streaming down his face now, cutting tracks through the dirt on his cheeks. "I don't know what else to do," he whispered. "I'm just a kid. Nobody listens to kids. I tried telling my teacher, but she said I was probably exaggerating. I tried calling the police, but they said without evidence there was nothing they could do. His name is Rick Holloway. He owns half the businesses in this town. Nobody's going to believe me over him." Marcus felt something cold settle in his chest. He knew the name Rick Holloway. Everyone in Millbrook knew it. The man had moved here about 5 years ago, bought up several struggling businesses, and positioned himself as some kind of local savior. He was on the town council, donated generously to the church, and showed up at every community event with a smile and a checkbook. But Marcus had seen the way Holloway's eyes tracked women at the summer festival. He'd heard whispers from some of the older men at the diner, jokes about keeping their wives away from him. He'd dismissed it as small-town gossip, the kind of petty jealousy that successful people often attracted. He was starting to realize he'd been wrong. "Ethan," Marcus said softly, "I believe you." The boy's head snapped up. "What?" "I said I believe you, and I'm going to help you. But first, I need you to give me the gun. Can you do that?" Slowly, with trembling hands, Ethan pulled a silver revolver from his pocket. It was small, probably a .38 Special, the kind people kept for home defense. Marcus took it carefully, checked the chamber, and found it fully loaded. "Thank you," he said, setting the weapon on the counter behind him, well out of reach. "That took real courage." "I'm not courageous," Ethan mumbled. "I'm just scared." "Son, courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing the right thing even when you're terrified. And what you just did, giving me that gun instead of doing something you can't take back, that's the bravest thing I've seen in a long time." Linda had sunk onto a nearby stool, her face buried in her hands. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. "Mrs. Holloway," Marcus said gently, "I know you're scared. I know you've probably convinced yourself that there's no way out. But I need you to understand something. There are people in this town who will help you if you let them, starting with me." She looked up, her mascara running in dark streaks down her cheeks. "You don't understand. Rick has connections everywhere. The police chief plays golf with him every Sunday. The mayor owes him money. Even the judge, Judge Patterson, they go hunting together every fall. If I try to leave, if I try to take Ethan and run, he'll find us. He always finds us. How many times have you tried?" Linda's silence was answer enough. "Twice," Ethan said. "The first time I was 7. We made it all the way to Kentucky before he tracked us down. The second time I was 9. We didn't even make it out of the county. After that, Mom stopped trying." Marcus looked at the woman, at the fear etched into every line of her face, and felt something he hadn't felt in years, a sense of purpose, a mission that actually mattered. "I'm going to close up the store," he said. "Then we're going to sit down, all 3 of us, and figure this out, because I promise you, Mrs. Holloway, your son didn't come to me by accident. And I don't believe in coincidences." The afternoon light was fading by the time Marcus flipped the sign on his door to "Closed." He'd led Linda and Ethan to the small office in the back of the store, a cramped space filled with inventory records and dusty filing cabinets. It wasn't much, but it was private, and right now privacy felt like the most valuable commodity in the world. "Start from the beginning," Marcus said, settling into his chair. "I need to understand everything." Linda took a shaky breath. "I met Rick 6 years ago. I was working at a diner in Memphis, just trying to make ends meet. Ethan's father had left when he was a baby, and I was raising him alone. Rick came in one day, all charm and smiles, and he seemed like a dream come true. He was successful, confident, and he actually seemed interested in a woman with a kid. Most men ran the other way when they found out I had a son. The warning signs were there from the beginning," Ethan muttered. I never liked him. You were 6 years old. You didn't like anyone who wasn't a cartoon character. I liked Marcus's store. First time I came in here, I knew he was different. Didn't talk down to me like I was stupid. Didn't ignore me like I was invisible. Just treated me like a person. Marcus remembered that day. It had been about 3 years ago, shortly after the Holloways moved to Millbrook. The boy had wandered in while his mother was shopping next door, and they'd spent 20 minutes talking about fishing lures. He'd seemed like a normal kid, maybe a little quiet, but normal. Marcus had never imagined what was happening behind the closed doors of the Holloway house. "When did the abuse start?" Marcus asked. Linda stared at her hands. "About a year after we got married. At first it was just little things, comments about how I dressed, who I talked to. He'd get jealous if I spent too much time with my co-workers at the diner. Then the comments turned into yelling, and the yelling turned into other things. He broke her wrist when I was 8, Ethan said. Told everyone she fell down the stairs. And you told your teacher about this? Ms. Rodriguez, she said she'd look into it. The next week she was transferred to a school in Nashville. Rick made some phone calls, said he thought she'd be happier in a bigger city with more opportunities. She was gone before she could do anything." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. He'd seen this kind of corruption before, in places where warlords controlled entire regions through fear and bribery. He'd never expected to find it in a small Tennessee town. "You mentioned calling the police," he said. "What happened exactly?" "I called the non-emergency line about a year ago," Ethan explained. "Told them my stepdad was hurting my mom. The officer who showed up was Deputy Thompson. He and Rick spent about 10 minutes talking on the porch, and then he left without even coming inside. That night, Rick told me if I ever called the cops again, he'd make sure I disappeared. Said he knew people who owed him favors. Said no one would ever find me." "Ethan," Linda said, her voice breaking, "I didn't know he said that to you. There's a lot you don't know, Mom, because you're too busy trying to survive to pay attention." The words hung in the air, sharp as broken glass. Marcus could see the pain they caused, the way Linda flinched like she'd been struck. "She's doing the best she can," Marcus said quietly. "When you're in survival mode, you can't always see what's happening to the people around you. It doesn't mean she loves you any less." Ethan's anger seemed to deflate. "I know. I'm so tired. I'm tired of being scared all the time. I'm tired of pretending everything's fine at school. I'm tired of watching him hurt her and not being able to do anything about it. That's why you took the gun. I thought if I could just make him stop, everything would be okay. I know it sounds stupid. I know it wouldn't have solved anything. But when I saw what he did to her last Tuesday, something inside me just snapped." Marcus leaned forward. "Tell me exactly what happened last Tuesday." Linda shook her head. "It doesn't matter." "It matters to me, Mrs. Holloway. Every detail matters." She was quiet for a long moment, and then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she began to speak. "He came home late. He'd been drinking with some business partners, and he was in one of his moods. I was making dinner, trying to keep everything perfect, but I'd left the toast in too long, and it burned. He came into the kitchen and saw the smoke, and he just lost it. He grabbed my arm and shoved me against the counter, said I was useless, said he didn't know why he'd ever married trash like me. Then he hit me, twice, once in the stomach, once across the face. He's careful about where he hits, usually goes for places people can't see, but that night he forgot himself." "Ethan saw this?" "I was supposed to be in my room doing homework," Ethan said, "but I heard her scream. By the time I got to the kitchen, he was already walking away, acting like nothing had happened. Mom was on the floor crying." Marcus took a deep breath. He'd interrogated terrorists who showed more emotion than he was feeling right now, but beneath the calm surface, something was building. A cold, focused rage that he'd learned to channel long ago. "Mrs. Holloway, do you want to leave him?" She looked up, her eyes red and swollen. "I don't know if I can. That's not what I asked. Do you want to?" The question hung in the air between them. Marcus watched as something shifted in Linda's expression, as years of suppressed hope flickered behind her eyes. Yes, she whispered, more than anything. Then we're going to make it happen. But I need you to trust me, and I need you to do exactly what I say. Can you do that? Linda nodded slowly. Ethan was watching Marcus with an intensity that belied his young age. What's the plan? The boy asked. First, we need to document everything, every bruise, every incident, every threat. Second, we need to find people in this town who aren't in Holloway's pocket. There have to be some. Third, we need to create a safe exit strategy that he can't anticipate or intercept. And fourth, Linda asked. Marcus's jaw tightened. Fourth, I'm going to have a conversation with your husband, man to man. The evening had grown dark by the time Marcus drove Linda and Ethan to a small motel on the outskirts of town. It wasn't much, just a single-story building with peeling paint and a flickering neon sign, but it was owned by an elderly widow named Grace Mitchell, who had no connection to Rick Holloway. Marcus had known Grace since he'd moved to Millbrook. She'd lost her husband in Vietnam, and when she learned that Marcus was a veteran, she'd taken him under her wing like a long-lost son. She was one of the few people in town who never asked about his service, never pried into his past, and never judged him for the haunted look that sometimes crept into his eyes. Marcus, Grace said when she opened the door to his knock, what's going on? I need a favor, Grace, a big one. He explained the situation quickly and efficiently. Grace listened without interrupting, her weathered face growing darker with each passing moment. That man, she said when Marcus finished. I knew there was something wrong about him. My Henry always said you could tell a man's true character by how he treats those weaker than himself. Rick Holloway treats everyone like they're beneath him. Can you give them a room? Off the books? No questions asked? Grace's eyes moved to Linda, who stood in the shadows, clutching Ethan's hand. The boy looked exhausted, the adrenaline of the afternoon finally catching up with him. Come on inside, both of you, Grace said, her voice softening. I've got a room in the back that nobody uses. Clean sheets, hot water, and I'll bring you some food. You look like you haven't had a good meal in months. Linda's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. You don't know what this means. Oh, honey, I know exactly what it means. I've lived long enough to see evil wear many faces. And I've lived long enough to know that the only way to fight it is to stand together. Once Linda and Ethan were settled, Marcus pulled Grace aside. I need to ask you something else. Do you know anyone on the town council who isn't in Holloway's pocket? Grace thought for a moment. Margaret Chen. She runs the library. She's been on the council for 15 years, and she's never been one to bow to pressure. There's also Father Thomas at St. Michael's. He may be a man of the cloth, but he's got a spine of steel when it comes to standing up for what's right. Anyone else? There's Dr. Elaine Foster at the clinic. She's seen things, treated things, that she couldn't talk about because of patient confidentiality. But I know it's eaten at her. If you could give her a reason to speak up, I think she would. Marcus nodded. I'll reach out to all of them tomorrow. In the meantime, I need you to keep Linda and Ethan safe. If anyone comes asking, you haven't seen them. Marcus. Grace's hand closed around his arm with surprising strength. What are you planning to do? Whatever I have to. The night was cold as Marcus drove back into town. The streets were empty. Most of Millbrook's residents already tucked into their homes with their televisions and their comfortable lives. They had no idea that a monster lived among them, hiding behind a smile and a checkbook. Rick Holloway's house sat on a hill at the edge of town, a sprawling ranch-style home that he'd renovated with money from his various business ventures. It was the kind of house that screamed success, with a manicured lawn and a 3-car garage, and a view of the entire valley below. Marcus parked his truck at the bottom of the driveway and walked up the rest of the way on foot. His boots made no sound on the pavement, old habits dying hard. By the time he reached the front door, he'd already catalogued 3 potential entry points, 2 security cameras, and the make and model of the cars in the garage. He knocked. The door opened a few moments later, revealing Rick Holloway in all his glory. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of practiced charm that came from years of working a room. His eyes were cold, though, calculating even as his mouth smiled. "Marcus Webb," Holloway said. "What brings you to my door at this hour?" "I think you know." Something flickered in Holloway's expression, there and gone in an instant. "I'm afraid you'll have to enlighten me. Your wife and stepson are safe. They're not coming back." The mask slipped just a fraction. "I don't know what you think you know, but whatever Linda told you, she didn't have to tell me anything. I saw the bruise on Ethan's face. I saw the fear in her eyes, and I've seen men like you before, Holloway, in places you couldn't imagine. The only difference is, those men didn't bother hiding what they were." Holloway's smile faded. "You should be very careful, Mr. Webb. You may have been a big shot in the Navy, but this is my town. I have friends in places that matter. So I've heard. The police chief, the mayor, the judge. Impressive network. But here's the thing about networks built on fear and favors. They tend to collapse when the pressure gets high enough. Is that a threat? It's a promise. I'm giving you one chance, Holloway. Leave town. Tonight. Don't contact Linda or Ethan again. Don't look back. Start over somewhere else, and maybe, just maybe, I'll let you walk away." Holloway laughed, the sound sharp and ugly. "Do you think you scare me? I've dealt with tougher men than you." "No, you haven't." Marcus's voice was quiet, but something in his tone made Holloway's laughter die in his throat. "I've spent 20 years learning how to destroy people like you. I know things that would give you nightmares for the rest of your life. And I'm telling you right now, if you stay in this town, if you try to hurt Linda or Ethan again, I will use everything I know to take you apart. Piece by piece, legally, financially, and every other way I can think of. By the time I'm done, you won't have a friend in the world. You won't have a dollar to your name. And everyone will know exactly what kind of man you really are." For a long moment, the two men stared at each other. The air between them crackled with tension. "You're making a big mistake," Holloway finally said. "This isn't over." "No," Marcus agreed. "It's just beginning." He turned and walked back down the driveway, feeling Holloway's eyes burning into his back the entire way. He didn't look back. The next morning, Marcus began making phone calls. His first call was to Margaret Chen, the librarian who sat on the town council. Margaret was a small woman in her 60s, with steel-grey hair and eyes that missed nothing. When Marcus explained the situation, her response was immediate. "I've suspected for years," she said. "But suspecting isn't the same as knowing, and knowing isn't the same as proving. What do you need from me?" "Your voice on the council. When the time comes, I need someone who's willing to stand up and demand answers." "You'll have it." His second call was to Father Thomas at St. Michael's. The priest listened in silence as Marcus laid out the facts, and when he was done, there was a long pause. "The Church has always taught that we must protect the innocent," Father Thomas finally said. "Linda Holloway and her son are innocents. I'll do whatever I can. Even if it means going against the people who fill your collection plates? Especially then. God doesn't care about money, Mr. Webb. He cares about souls." Dr. Elaine Foster was harder to reach. The clinic was busy, and Marcus had to wait nearly 2 hours before she could see him. When he finally sat down across from her in her small office, he could see the wariness in her eyes. "I can't discuss patient information," she said, before he'd even opened his mouth. "Confidentiality laws—" "I'm not asking you to violate confidentiality, Doctor. I'm asking you to be ready. When Linda Holloway decides to press charges, she's going to need medical documentation. I'm asking if you're willing to provide it when the time comes." Dr. Foster's hands were trembling slightly. "Rick Holloway has donated thousands of dollars to this clinic. If you don't, a woman is going to die. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. And when that happens, everyone who could have helped and didn't will have to live with that knowledge." The doctor was quiet for a long moment. "I became a physician to save lives, not to protect monsters. Then help me protect the people who matter." She nodded slowly. "When the time comes, I'll be ready." By midday, Marcus had assembled a small but determined group of allies. In addition to Margaret, Father Thomas, and Dr. Foster, he'd recruited Jake Harrison, a retired lawyer who had spent 30 years prosecuting domestic violence cases in Nashville before moving to Millbrook for the quiet life. Jake was 72 years old, with a mind like a steel trap and a burning hatred of men who hurt women. "I thought I was done with this work," Jake said, as they sat in Marcus's hardware store, the closed sign still hanging on the door. "But some injustices are too great to ignore. What do we need to build a case? Documentation, first and foremost. Photographs of injuries, medical records, witness statements, any evidence of financial abuse or control. And most importantly, we need Linda to be willing to testify. She's scared. Holloway has people everywhere. Then we need to give her a reason to be brave. We need to show her that she's not alone, that when she steps forward, there will be an army of people standing behind her." Marcus nodded. "There's something else you should know. Holloway isn't just abusive. He's connected. He's got the police chief, the mayor, and the judge in his pocket." Jake's eyes narrowed. "Then we take it over their heads. Federal authorities, state agencies, the media if necessary. Men like Holloway think they're untouchable because they've controlled the local game for so long. They forget that there's a bigger world out there, one they can't buy or intimidate." That afternoon, Marcus returned to the motel to check on Linda and Ethan. He found them in the small room Grace had provided, sitting together on the bed watching cartoons on an ancient television. For a moment, they looked almost peaceful. "How are you holding up?" Marcus asked. Linda managed a weak smile. "Better, I think. Just knowing that we're not alone anymore, it helps. I've been talking to some people, good people who want to help. But I need to ask you something important, Linda. Are you willing to press charges against Rick?" Her face paled. I don't know if I can. I understand. But if we're going to stop him for good, we need to go through the legal system. That means documenting the abuse, filing reports, and eventually testifying in court. He'll find a way out of it. He always does. Not this time. We're going to build such an airtight case that no amount of money or connections can save him. But I need you to be brave, Linda. I need you to trust me." Ethan had been listening silently. Now he spoke up, his voice steady despite his age. "Mum, we have to do this, not just for us but for everyone else. What if there are other people he's hurting? What if he hurts someone else after we're gone? We can't just run away again, we have to fight." Linda looked at her son, and Marcus saw something shift in her expression. The fear was still there, but beneath it, something else was emerging. Something that looked like resolve. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll do it." Over the next few days, Marcus and his team worked around the clock. Dr. Foster provided medical records dating back 3 years, documenting a pattern of injuries that couldn't be explained by accidents. Jake prepared legal documents and reached out to contacts at the State Attorney General's office. Father Thomas opened the church as a meeting place for people who wanted to help, and Margaret began quietly organizing support on the town council. But their activities didn't go unnoticed. On the 4th day, Marcus arrived at his hardware store to find the front window shattered. Glass covered the sidewalk, and painted across the remaining shards were 2 words in red: "Back off." He was cleaning up the mess when a police cruiser pulled up. Deputy Thompson stepped out, his face arranged in a mask of professional concern. "Mr. Webb, what happened here?" "Vandalism, Deputy. Happened sometime overnight." "Any idea who might have done it?" Marcus met the deputy's eyes. "I have some suspicions." "Well, we'll certainly look into it. You know, strange things have been happening in town lately. People asking questions, stirring up trouble. Some folks are starting to get nervous." "Nervous about what?" Thompson smiled, and there was nothing friendly in it. "Just a word of advice, Mr. Webb. Sometimes it's better to let sleeping dogs lie. You start poking around in other people's business, you never know what might happen." "Is that a threat, Deputy?" "Just some friendly advice from one man to another." After Thompson left, Marcus made a phone call to Jake Harrison. "We need to accelerate the timeline," he said. "Holloway knows we're coming. He's going to try to shut us down before we can make our move. I've been in touch with a contact at the State Attorney General's office. They're interested, but they need something concrete, something more than medical records and hearsay." "What about financial records? Holloway's businesses, his donations, his connections to local officials? If we can prove a pattern of bribery or corruption, that would certainly help. But how do you propose we get access to that information?" Marcus thought for a moment. "There's someone who might be able to help. Someone who knows where all the bodies are buried." That evening, Marcus paid a visit to the Millbrook Town Hall. It was after hours, but a light was still on in one of the offices. He knocked on the door and waited. The door opened to reveal a woman in her 30s with nervous eyes and a coffee cup in her hand. Her name tag read, "Susan Mills, Administrative Assistant." "Mr. Webb, what are you doing here?" "I need to talk to you, Susan, about your boss." Susan's face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do. I've seen the way you look at him when he walks through the office. I've seen the way you flinch when he raises his voice. You know what kind of man Rick Holloway is. You've probably known for years. Please, you don't understand. I can't..." "Can't what? Can't speak the truth? Can't do the right thing? Susan, there's a woman and a child whose lives depend on people like you finding the courage to stand up." Tears were forming in Susan's eyes. "He'll destroy me. He'll destroy my family." "Not if we destroy him first. All I need is access to his financial records. The donations he's made to local officials, the favors he's called in, the bribes he's paid. I know you have access to that information. I know you've probably seen things that made your stomach turn." Susan was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, she reached for a set of keys on her desk. "His office is down the hall, third door on the left. The filing cabinet behind his desk contains everything you're looking for. The combination is 10-22-15. His daughter's birthday." Marcus took the keys. "Thank you, Susan. You're doing the right thing. Just make sure it's worth it. Make sure you take him down." "I intend to." The documents in Holloway's office were more damning than Marcus had dared to hope. Years of payments to local officials, carefully disguised as donations and consulting fees. Evidence of property deals that had mysteriously favored Holloway's businesses. Records of complaints against him that had been quietly buried. And most damning of all, a series of emails between Holloway and the police chief discussing how to handle the situation with Linda if she ever tried to leave again. Marcus photographed everything and returned the keys to Susan before slipping out into the night. The next morning, he met with Jake and the others to share what he'd found. "This is it," Jake said, his eyes gleaming as he reviewed the documents. "This is enough to bring down not just Holloway, but everyone who's been protecting him. How do we proceed? We go to the State Attorney General's office. Tomorrow, in person. We lay out everything we have and let them take it from there." That evening, Marcus returned to the motel to share the news with Linda and Ethan. But when he arrived, Grace met him at the door with a worried expression. "They're not here, Marcus." "What do you mean they're not here?" "They left about 2 hours ago. A man came to see them. Tall, well-dressed, said he was Linda's brother. I didn't think anything of it at the time, but afterward, I got to thinking, and I realized I'd never heard Linda mention having a brother." Marcus's blood ran cold. "Did you get a look at the car they left in?" "Black SUV. Tennessee plates. I didn't catch the number." He was already running for his truck when his phone rang. He answered without looking at the screen. "Mr. Webb." Rick Holloway's voice was smooth, controlled. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." "Where are they, Holloway?" "Safe for now. But that could change very quickly depending on how this conversation goes. What do you want?" "I want those documents you stole from my office. All of them. Originals and copies. You bring them to me alone, and maybe we can work something out. And if I don't, then your little crusade is going to have some very tragic consequences. I'll give you 1 hour to make your decision. There's an abandoned warehouse off Highway 12, about 3 miles outside of town. You know the one I'm talking about. Bring the documents and come alone. If I see anyone else, or if I even suspect you've contacted the authorities, well, let's just say it won't end well for Mrs. Holloway and her son." The line went dead. Marcus stood in the parking lot of the motel, his mind racing through options. He could call Jake, rally his allies, try to coordinate some kind of rescue, but Holloway was smart, and he was desperate, which made him dangerous. Any sign of interference could push him over the edge. There was only one option that made sense. He got in his truck and drove. The warehouse off Highway 12 had been abandoned for decades, its rusting hulk a remnant of Millbrook's industrial past. As Marcus pulled up, he saw Holloway's black SUV parked near the entrance, along with 2 other vehicles he didn't recognize. He grabbed the folder of documents from his passenger seat and stepped out of the truck. The warehouse doors creaked as he pushed them open. Inside, the space was lit by a few flickering work lights that cast long shadows across the concrete floor. Holloway stood in the center of the room, flanked by 2 men who had the look of hired muscle. Behind them, Linda and Ethan sat on folding chairs, their hands bound, their eyes wide with fear. "Mr. Webb," Holloway said, spreading his arms in a gesture of mock welcome. "So glad you could join us." "Let them go, Holloway. This is between you and me. I'm afraid it's not that simple. You've made it your business to meddle in my affairs, to turn my wife against me, to steal from me. You've cost me a great deal, Mr. Webb. Money, reputation, peace of mind. I think it's only fair that you pay the price. You want the documents? Here they are." Marcus held up the folder. "Every incriminating piece of paper from your office. Take them. I don't care anymore. Just let them go." Holloway nodded to one of his men, who walked forward and snatched the folder from Marcus's hand. He flipped through it quickly, then nodded. "It's all here." "Good." Holloway smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "The problem is, Mr. Webb, documents can be copied, and I have a feeling you're not the kind of man who would hand over his only leverage without a backup plan. You have my word. There are no copies. Your word means nothing to me. I've done some research on you, you know. Navy SEAL, 20 years of service, Medal of Honor, very impressive, but I've also learned that men like you have a hard time letting things go. You're wired to keep fighting until the mission is complete, and as long as you're alive, you'll be a threat to everything I've built." Marcus heard the click of safeties being disengaged behind him. He didn't need to turn around to know that more men had entered the warehouse, blocking his escape. "So here's what's going to happen," Holloway continued. "You're going to disappear. Tragic accident, suicide, whatever story seems most convincing. Linda and Ethan are going to come home with me where they belong, and life in Millbrook will go back to normal. You really think you can get away with this? I've gotten away with worse." Marcus looked past Holloway to where Linda sat, her face pale, but her eyes burning with something that might have been rage. Beside her, Ethan was watching him with an expression of desperate hope. In that moment, Marcus made a decision. He'd spent 20 years learning how to be a weapon, how to move, how to fight, how to survive against impossible odds. He'd hoped he'd never have to use those skills again, not in this quiet town, not in this quiet life he'd built for himself. But some things were worth fighting for. He moved. The 2 men behind him were the first to go down, a spinning elbow to the first one's temple, a knee to the second one's groin, and they were on the floor before anyone else could react. Marcus scooped up one of their dropped weapons and put 3 rounds into the ceiling. "Nobody move!" Holloway's hired muscle froze, their hands halfway to their weapons. Holloway himself stood slack-jawed, his arrogance evaporating in the face of violence he'd never expected. "Here's what's going to happen," Marcus said, his voice cold and steady. "Everyone is going to get on the ground, hands behind your heads. Anyone who tries anything clever is going to find out what happens when you provoke a man who's killed more people than he can count." Slowly, reluctantly, the men complied. Marcus moved through them quickly, disarming each one and tossing their weapons into a pile by the wall. Then he turned to Holloway. You wanted a war, Marcus said. You've got one. He walked to Linda and Ethan and cut their bonds with a knife from his belt. Linda threw her arms around him, sobbing with relief. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. We need to get out of here." As they moved toward the exit, Holloway found his voice. "This isn't over, Webb. You can't protect them forever. I have resources you can't imagine. I'll hunt you down. I'll hunt all of you down." Marcus paused at the door. "You're right, Holloway. This isn't over, but it will be soon. And when it is, you're going to learn something that men like you never understand until it's too late. Power built on fear and cruelty is no power at all. It's just an illusion that shatters the moment someone calls your bluff." He turned and walked out into the night, Linda and Ethan close behind. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. With the evidence Marcus had gathered, along with the testimonies of Linda, Dr. Foster, Susan Mills, and a growing number of other witnesses, the State Attorney General's office launched a full investigation into Rick Holloway and his network of corruption. The police chief was the first to fall. Confronted with evidence of bribery and obstruction of justice, he resigned his position and fled the state. The mayor followed shortly after, along with Judge Patterson and several members of the town council who had been on Holloway's payroll. Holloway himself tried to fight. He hired the best lawyers money could buy, attempted to intimidate witnesses, and even tried to flee the country. But his passport had been flagged, his assets frozen, and one by one his allies abandoned him. The trial was held in a county courthouse 2 hours away, far from the web of influence Holloway had spent years constructing. Linda testified for 3 days, her voice growing stronger with each passing hour as she laid bare the years of abuse she had suffered. Ethan testified too, describing in heartbreaking detail what it had been like to grow up in a house ruled by fear. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning a verdict of guilty on all counts. Rick Holloway was sentenced to 25 years in prison, with no possibility of parole. In the aftermath of the trial, something remarkable happened in Millbrook. The corruption that had festered for years was dragged into the light, and the community began the slow process of healing. New leaders emerged, people who had been too afraid to speak up before, but who now found their voices. Margaret Chen was elected mayor. Dr. Foster expanded her clinic to include a domestic violence support center. Father Thomas started a weekly support group for survivors of abuse. And Jake Harrison came out of retirement to establish a legal aid fund for victims who couldn't afford representation. As for Marcus, he reopened his hardware store and went back to selling snow shovels and ice melt. But something had changed in him too. The haunted look that had sometimes crept into his eyes was gone, replaced by something that might have been peace. One afternoon, about 6 months after the trial, the bell above his door chimed, and he looked up to see Ethan walking in. The boy had grown taller, and the bruises that had marked his face were long gone. He carried himself differently now, with a confidence that hadn't been there before. "Hey, Mr. Webb. Hey, Ethan, how's your mom?" "Good, really good. She started a job at the library last week. Mrs. Chen hired her." "That's great to hear." Ethan wandered through the store, examining the shelves with the casual interest of someone who had nowhere particular to be. "I've been thinking," he said, "about that day I came in here, when I asked you to arrest me. I remember. I was so scared. I thought everything was hopeless, that there was nothing anyone could do, that me taking that gun was the only option I had left. But it wasn't. No, it wasn't, because you listened. You actually listened to me. Nobody had ever done that before, not really." Marcus set down the box he'd been holding. "You know what I remember most about that day?" "What?" "How brave you were. You were 12 years old, facing down a monster, trying to protect your mother. Most adults I've known wouldn't have had that kind of courage." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "I didn't feel brave. I felt terrified. That's what bravery is, Ethan. It's not the absence of fear. It's doing the right thing, even when you're scared out of your mind. The boy nodded slowly, as if filing this information away for future reference. "I wanted to ask you something," he said. "My mom and I were talking and, well, the anniversary of my dad leaving is coming up. My real dad, I mean. And I was wondering if maybe, if you weren't too busy, you might want to come over for dinner." Marcus felt something warm spread through his chest. "I'd like that, Ethan. I'd like that a lot." As the boy left the store, Marcus found himself thinking about all the ways this story could have ended differently if he hadn't opened that hardware store, if Ethan hadn't wandered in that day, if he'd turned away instead of listening. But he had listened, and sometimes that was all it took. One person willing to pay attention, one person willing to stand up. The world was full of darkness. Marcus knew that better than most, but it was also full of light if you were willing to look for it. And sometimes the smallest spark could illuminate everything. Outside, the autumn wind swept through the streets of Millbrook, carrying with it the scent of fallen leaves and the distant promise of winter. But for the first time in a long time, Marcus Webb wasn't worried about the cold. He had found his purpose again. And in a small town in Tennessee, that was enough. Linda Holloway stood in front of the mirror in her small apartment, barely recognizing the woman staring back at her. It had been 8 months since the trial, 8 months since Rick had been locked away, and she still caught herself looking over her shoulder, still flinched at unexpected sounds. The therapist she'd been seeing said that was normal, that healing wasn't linear, that trauma left marks that took years to fade. But today, something felt different. She was wearing a blue dress, the first new piece of clothing she'd bought for herself in years. Rick had always controlled what she wore, insisted she dress modestly, conservatively, in colors that didn't draw attention. "You're a wife and mother," he used to say, "not some desperate woman looking for attention." The blue dress was vibrant, alive, the color of a summer sky. It made her feel like someone worth noticing. "Mom, are you ready?" Ethan called from the living room. "We're going to be late." "Coming!" She took one last look at herself in the mirror, at the woman she was becoming, and smiled. Today was important. Today, the town of Millbrook was dedicating the new community center that had risen from the ashes of Rick Holloway's corruption. Built on land that had once belonged to his now liquidated business holdings, funded by seized assets and community donations, it was a symbol of everything the town had fought for. And Linda had been asked to say a few words at the ceremony. The very thought of public speaking made her stomach churn. For years, she'd been taught to be invisible, to let Rick do the talking while she stood silently at his side. But this was part of her healing, her therapist said, reclaiming her voice, using it to help others who were still trapped in situations like hers. The community center's parking lot was packed when they arrived. It seemed like half the town had turned out for the dedication, families with children, elderly couples, teenagers who had probably been dragged here by their parents. A small stage had been set up near the entrance, decorated with banners and streamers. Linda spotted Marcus immediately. He was standing near the edge of the crowd, looking slightly uncomfortable in a suit and tie. She couldn't help but smile. In all the months she'd known him, she'd never seen him in anything but jeans and flannel. "You clean up nice," she said as she approached. He tugged at his collar. "This thing is trying to strangle me." "It suits you, though." "If you say so." Ethan had already disappeared into the crowd, gravitating toward a group of kids his age. Linda watched him go with a mixture of pride and wonder. He had friends now, real friends, not the surface-level acquaintances Rick had permitted. He laughed freely, spoke his mind, argued about video games and sports with the passion only a 13-year-old could muster. He was becoming himself, and it was the most beautiful thing she'd ever witnessed. "How are you feeling about the speech?" Marcus asked. "Terrified, but good terrified, if that makes sense." "Perfect sense." Mayor Margaret Chen took the stage and the crowd gradually quieted. She spoke about resilience, about community, about the power of standing together against darkness. She thanked the volunteers who had helped build the center, the donors who had contributed funds, the survivors who had shared their stories. Then she called Linda to the stage. The walk felt like it took forever. Linda was acutely aware of every eye on her, every whispered conversation that died as she passed. She climbed the steps on legs that felt like jelly and gripped the edges of the podium like a lifeline. For a moment she couldn't speak. The words she'd prepared, the sentences she'd rehearsed, vanished from her mind like morning mist. And then she saw Ethan in the crowd, standing between Marcus and Grace Mitchell, his face alight with pride and encouragement. She found her voice. 8 months ago, I didn't know if I would survive. I was trapped in a situation that seemed hopeless, controlled by a man who had convinced me that I was worthless, that I deserved everything that happened to me, that there was no way out. Her voice trembled, but she pressed on. I believed him. For years, I believed him. I believed that I was alone, that nobody would help me, that even if I screamed at the top of my lungs, nobody would hear. She paused, gathering herself. I was wrong. When my son walked into a hardware store and asked a stranger for help, that stranger listened. He didn't dismiss us. He didn't turn away. He saw 2 people in danger and he chose to act. And that choice set in motion a chain of events that brought us here today. She looked out at the crowd, at the faces of neighbors she'd never dared to trust, at the allies who had risked everything to help her. This community center is more than just a building. It's a promise that no one in this town will ever have to suffer alone. A promise that when someone cries out for help, there will be people ready to answer. A promise that even in our darkest moments, there is always hope. Her eyes found Marcus again. To everyone who helped us, who believed us when it would have been easier to look away, thank you. You saved our lives. And I promise you, we will spend the rest of our lives paying it forward. She stepped back from the podium to thunderous applause. Margaret Chen embraced her, and then she was making her way back through the crowd, accepting handshakes and hugs from people she barely knew, but who all seemed to want her to understand that she wasn't alone. When she finally reached Marcus, she was crying. That was beautiful, he said. I couldn't have done any of it without you. Yes, you could have. You just didn't know it yet. They stood together as the ceremony continued, watching as children played on the new playground, as families explored the building, as the people of Millbrook celebrated something they'd built together. Later that evening, after the crowds had dispersed and the sun had begun its slow descent toward the horizon, Marcus found himself alone on the porch of his small house at the edge of town. It wasn't much, just a 2-bedroom cabin he'd bought when he first moved to Millbrook, but it suited him, quiet, secluded, with a view of the hills that reminded him why he'd chosen this place. His phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. Thanks for everything, Mr. Webb. Tonight was awesome. He smiled and typed a reply. Proud of you, kid, and proud of your mom. He was about to set the phone down when it buzzed again. This time, a call from a number he didn't recognize. Hello? Is this Marcus Webb? The voice on the other end was female, professional, with an accent that might have been Boston. Who's asking? My name is Catherine Price. I'm a producer with a documentary film company based in New York. I've been following the story of what happened in Millbrook, and I was hoping to talk to you about participating in a project. Marcus felt his guard go up. I'm not interested in being interviewed. I understand, and I respect that. But before you say no, let me explain what we're trying to do. This isn't about sensationalism or exploitation. It's about telling the stories of communities that have overcome corruption, that have stood up to people who abused their power. Stories like yours could inspire people all over the country who are facing similar situations. I didn't do anything special. I just helped some people who needed it. That's exactly what makes it special, Mr. Webb. You didn't have to help. You chose to. In a world where most people look the other way, that choice matters. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. The woman wasn't wrong. He knew that. But the idea of cameras and interviews and his face on television screens across the country made his skin crawl. Can I think about it? Of course. Take all the time you need. I'll send you my contact information, and if you decide you're interested, Just reach out. After he hung up, Marcus sat on his porch and watched the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. He thought about all the people he'd served with over the years, the brothers and sisters in arms who had given their lives for missions most Americans would never know about. They hadn't sought recognition or glory. They'd done their jobs because it was right, because someone had to, because there were innocent people who needed protecting. He'd spent 7 years trying to leave that life behind, trying to become someone normal, someone unremarkable, someone who could disappear into the comfortable anonymity of small-town life. But maybe that wasn't what he was meant for. Maybe there was another way to serve, another way to make a difference. He picked up his phone and looked at the number Catherine Price had sent. Not yet, he decided, but maybe someday. For now, there was still work to do in Millbrook, still people who needed help, still a community that was learning to trust again. The wind picked up, rustling through the trees, carrying with it the scent of pine and the distant sound of laughter from somewhere in town. Marcus closed his eyes and let the peace wash over him. Tomorrow, there would be new challenges, new battles to fight, new people to save. But tonight, he could rest. 3 months later, the first snowfall of winter blanketed Millbrook in white. Marcus was helping a customer at his hardware store when he saw a familiar face across the street. Deputy Thompson. The former officer had been stripped of his badge, charged with corruption, and sentenced to 2 years in federal prison. He must have been released early. Thompson saw him too. For a long moment, the two men stared at each other. Marcus could see the hatred in the other man's eyes. Then Thompson turned and walked away. Marcus made a mental note to mention the sighting to Margaret Chen. That evening, Grace Mitchell visited him. "I've been thinking about the motel," she said, "about what I want to do with it when I'm gone. I want to leave it to you." Marcus was surprised. "Grace, I don't know the first thing about running a motel." "You didn't know the first thing about running a hardware store either." She placed her weathered hand over his. "That motel has always been a safe haven. You understand that better than anyone." After she left, Marcus thought about her words. The motel had been a lifeline for Linda and Ethan. Maybe it could become more than just a place to sleep. Maybe it could become a sanctuary. He called Jake Harrison. "Jake, it's Marcus. I need to talk to you about an idea." The community center became the heart of Millbrook's revival. Father Thomas held weekly sessions, teaching people to recognize signs of abuse. Linda became a dedicated volunteer, training as a victim advocate. She had found her calling in helping others escape the kind of nightmare she'd lived through. Ethan thrived in school. His grades improved, and he joined the debate team. He also spent more time at Marcus's hardware store, learning how to fix things. "If you keep this up, I might have to put you on the payroll," Marcus said one afternoon. Ethan grinned. "Does that mean I get to boss people around?" "Absolutely not." But he came back every day, and Marcus found himself looking forward to the boys' visits. He'd never had children of his own, but there was something about Ethan that filled a void he hadn't realized existed. It was a snowy Saturday when everything changed again. Marcus was closing the store when Ethan stumbled in, pale and shaking. "It's my mom. She didn't come home from work, and I found this." He thrust a crumpled paper into Marcus's hands. "You thought it was over. It isn't." Marcus's mind raced. Rick Holloway was still in prison, but Holloway had allies who might do his dirty work. Deputy Thompson. "Stay here," Marcus told Ethan. "Lock the door behind me." The boy nodded. Marcus called Jake Harrison as he drove. "Jake, Linda's missing. I think it might be Thompson." "Thompson? He's been keeping a low profile." "A low profile doesn't mean he's not planning something. Where are you heading?" "The community center first, then Thompson's last known address." "I'll make some calls." "See if anyone's seen anything?" The community center was dark when Marcus arrived, the parking lot empty except for Linda's car. His heart sank when he saw it. She'd never leave without her car. Not willingly. He circled the building, looking for any sign of forced entry or struggle. He found it at the back door, a smear of blood on the door handle, and in the snow, 2 sets of footprints. One smaller, probably Linda's, one larger, dragging her along. Marcus followed the footprints to where they disappeared at the edge of the parking lot. Tire tracks in the snow, a truck from the look of them. Heading east, out of town. He knew where they were going. The same place Holloway had taken them before, the abandoned warehouse off Highway 12. The drive felt like it took hours, though it couldn't have been more than 15 minutes. Marcus pushed his truck to its limits, fishtailing on the icy roads, but never slowing down. His mind was a cold, focused blade, cutting through the fear and anger to the mission at hand. Get Linda back, whatever it takes. The warehouse loomed out of the darkness like a monument to decay. Thompson's truck was parked outside, along with another vehicle Marcus didn't recognize. 2 hostiles, maybe more. He parked his truck 100 yards away and approached on foot, moving silently through the snow. The military training that had lain dormant for years came flooding back, muscle memory taking over. He circled the building, counting entry points. 2 guards at the front, 1 at the back. Amateur setup, overconfident, good. Overconfident enemies made mistakes. He took out the back guard first, a quick chokehold that dropped the man without a sound. Then he slipped through the rear door and into the darkness. The interior of the warehouse was much as he remembered it, flickering work lights, long shadows, and in the center, tied to a chair, Linda Holloway. She was alive, bruised, terrified, but alive. Standing over her was Deputy Thompson, a gun in his hand. "You know," Thompson was saying, his voice carrying in the empty space, "I had a good thing going before you came along. Respect, power. A little extra cash in my pocket to make life comfortable, and then you had to go and ruin it all. You and this woman and her brat." "It's not her fault," Marcus said, stepping out of the shadows. "It's mine. You want someone to blame. Blame me." Thompson spun, his gun coming up. "Webb, I was hoping you'd show up. Here I am. Let her go." "Let her go?" Thompson laughed, an ugly sound. "That's not how this works. See? I've lost everything because of you people. My job, my reputation, 2 years of my life. So I figure it's only fair that you lose something too. What do you want, Thompson? Money. I'll give you everything I have." "I don't want your money. I want you to suffer, the same way I've suffered." "Then take me. Let Linda go, and you can do whatever you want to me." Thompson seemed to consider this tempting, but not quite satisfying enough. He turned the gun toward Linda. "I think I'll start with her and make you watch." Marcus moved. Years of training condensed into a single explosive moment. He closed the distance in a heartbeat, grabbing Thompson's gun arm and twisting it away from Linda. The gun went off, the shot going wild, and then they were on the ground, struggling for control of the weapon. Thompson was younger, but Marcus had decades of combat experience. He found an opening, drove his elbow into Thompson's solar plexus, and followed it with a knee to the jaw. The former deputy went limp. Marcus scooped up the fallen gun and turned to Linda. "Are you okay?" She was crying, trembling, but she managed a nod. "How did you find me?" "I followed the trail. Thompson's not as smart as he thinks he is." He untied her quickly, supporting her as she tried to stand on legs that had been bound for hours. "The guards outside," she managed. "Dealt with. Can you walk?" "I think so." They made their way out of the warehouse, just as the sound of sirens split the night. Jake had come through, calling in reinforcements from the state police. The next few hours were a blur of questions, statements, and medical examinations. Thompson and his accomplices were taken into custody, this time facing charges that would keep them locked up for a very long time. Ethan arrived at the hospital just as the doctors finished checking Linda over. He threw himself into her arms, sobbing with relief. "I thought I'd lost you," he said. "I'm here, sweetheart. I'm okay." "We're all okay." Marcus stood in the corner of the room, watching the reunion with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. It was over. Again, but this time felt different, more final somehow. Linda looked up and caught his eye. "Thank you," she mouthed. He nodded once, then slipped out of the room to give them privacy. Spring came early to Millbrook that year. The snow melted, the flowers bloomed, and life began to return to its normal rhythms. But nothing was quite the same as it had been before. Grace Mitchell passed away peacefully in her sleep on the first day of April. She left the motel to Marcus, just as she'd promised, along with a letter explaining her hopes for what it could become. "This place has always been a haven for those who need one," she wrote. "I know you'll honor that legacy." Marcus did. Working with Linda, Jake, and a growing network of supporters, he transformed the old motel into a full-fledged shelter for victims of domestic violence. It offered safe housing, counseling services, legal aid, and job training. It became a model for similar facilities across the state. They named it Grace's Haven. The documentary producer, Catherine Price, came back to Millbrook to film the story of its creation. This time, Marcus agreed to participate. "I changed my mind," he told her when she asked why. "I realized that staying silent wasn't protecting anyone. If my story can help even one person find the courage to ask for help, then it's worth telling." The documentary aired on a national network in the fall. It told the story of Millbrook's transformation, from a town controlled by corruption to a community united by compassion. It featured interviews with Marcus, Linda, Ethan, Jake, Father Thomas, and dozens of others who had played a part in the town's rebirth. The response was overwhelming. Donations poured in. Other communities reached out, asking how they could replicate Millbrook's success. Marcus found himself traveling to other towns, other states, sharing what he'd learned about standing up to power and building networks of support. He never sought the spotlight, never craved the attention, but he accepted it as another form of service, another mission in a life that had been defined by them. On the first anniversary of the community center's dedication, Millbrook held a celebration that drew visitors from across the country. There were speeches and music and a massive potluck dinner that showcased the best of Tennessee home cooking. Marcus stood at the edge of the crowd, watching Ethan race around with his friends, watching Linda laugh at something Margaret Chen said, watching this community he'd accidentally helped build come together in joy and fellowship. He felt a hand on his arm and turned to see a woman he didn't recognize. She was about Linda's age, with tired eyes and a nervous smile. "Excuse me," she said. "Are you Marcus Webb?" "I am. My name is Patricia. I drove here from Arkansas. I saw the documentary and I needed to talk to someone who might understand." Marcus looked at her, really looked, and saw all the signs he'd learned to recognize. The way she held herself, the fading bruise on her wrist, the fear that never quite left her eyes. "Why don't we find somewhere quiet to talk?" he said. As they walked together toward Grace's Haven, Marcus thought about how it had all started. A boy in a hardware store asking to be arrested. A mother too terrified to run. A town trapped under the thumb of a monster, and one man who had chosen to listen. That was the thing about change, he realized. It didn't require armies or revolutions or impossible feats of heroism. Sometimes all it required was a single moment of genuine human connection. Someone willing to say, "I hear you. I believe you. You're not alone." The wind rustled through the newly leafed trees, carrying with it the scent of spring flowers and the sound of children laughing. Millbrook had been transformed, yes, but the transformation wasn't complete. It never would be, because there would always be more Lindas, more Ethans, more Patricias, more people crying out for help in the darkness, and as long as there were, Marcus Webb would be there to answer. A year later, Ethan turned 14. Linda threw him a birthday party at Grace's Haven. Marcus brought a present wrapped in hardware store brown paper. "What is it?" Ethan asked. "Open it and find out." Inside was a well-worn copy of Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. "It's about a man who survived one of the worst things humans have ever done to each other," Marcus explained, "and how he found purpose and meaning even in the midst of unimaginable suffering. I read it when I was about your age. It changed my life." Later that evening, Ethan found Marcus sitting on the porch of the Haven, watching the sunset. "Do you ever regret it?" the boy asked. "Getting involved in all of this instead of just living a quiet life?" "No," Marcus said. "I spent 20 years protecting people I'd never meet. When I retired, I thought I wanted peace. But that was never really who I was." "Who are you then?" "Someone who can't walk away when people need help." "What about you?" Ethan was quiet for a long moment. "I want to be someone who helps people, like you helped us." Marcus felt a swell of pride. "I think you're well on your way, Ethan." They sat together watching the stars emerge. Life went on, full of pain and beauty. The scars remained, but so did hope. And in the end, that was enough. 2 years after that birthday party, Marcus received a letter from Ethan, now finishing his freshman year. He'd made the honor roll and joined the debate team. "Dear Mr. Webb," the letter began, "I've been thinking about that day we met. I chose your store on purpose. I'd heard stories about the Navy SEAL who ran the hardware store. I thought if anyone could stop me, it would be you. What I didn't expect was kindness. You listened. You treated me like a person, not a problem. That changed everything. Whenever I'm tempted to give up, I think about what you would do. And then I do the harder thing, the right thing. I'm going to spend my life trying to be the kind of person you are. Someone who stands up for people who can't stand up for themselves. Someone who sees darkness and chooses to be a light. Thank you for arresting me that day, even though you couldn't actually arrest anyone. I think we both know what I really meant." Your friend, Ethan Marcus, read the letter 3 times, then folded it and placed it in his desk drawer, alongside his Navy Cross and Grace Mitchell's final letter. He walked to the window. Main Street was bustling with summer tourists. Grace's Haven had just opened a second location in the next county. So much had changed since that autumn day. And yet, in the ways that mattered most, nothing had changed at all. There would always be people in need. There would always be darkness to fight. But there would also be moments of connection, of hope, of quiet triumph. Marcus Webb smiled, tucked Ethan's letter into his pocket, and went back to work. Some stories were meant to go on forever.